Story 1. My boyfriend, who had no history of seizures, narrowly escaped dying because my overthinking led me to break into his house when he did not answer the phone. My overthinking began a few nights earlier. He mentioned that he had bitten his tongue in his sleep and woke up with a bloody pillow and a sore mouth, but he had no memory of it. That made me wonder, did he have a seizure and not realize it? We had been together for several years, and I had never seen any sign of a seizure, but the thought stuck in my mind. 2 days later, we had an appointment to see a specific dog at the shelter I was considering adopting. He did not answer the phone that morning. I called multiple times before I went to his place, but he never picked up. I had a bad feeling but tried to convince myself a seizure was unlikely, while making a plan in case it was. I got to his house and he did not answer, so in a completely out-of-character move I climbed over his fence. Luckily, his door was unlocked. I found him unconscious and unresponsive, lying on his back with foam around his mouth. I rolled him onto his side to reduce the risk of aspiration, put a pillow under his shoulder to keep him in that position, and called an ambulance. Had I not gone over when he did not pick up the phone, had we not made plans to meet earlier than usual, he would have been dead by lunch. His kidneys were already failing by the time he reached the emergency room. If he had not mentioned biting his tongue in his sleep, I probably would not have gone over that morning and I would not have found him. It turned out to be a brain disease called cerebral cavernous malformations, which is somewhat more common in New Mexico. Several days later, after we got home from the hospital, a friend called to say the dog we were supposed to see that day was still at the shelter. I had given up hope of getting her while he was hospitalized, but they had forgotten to take down the 24-hour hold sign on her cage, so no one inquired about her. She is now our miracle dog and the sweetest animal I have ever owned. My boyfriend would not be alive today if we had not made an appointment to meet her. Story 2. I always carry a small sewing kit whenever I go to a wedding. I have sewn 2 brides into their dresses so far. Story 3. All teachers at the middle school where I taught knew I was a pack rat. One day, a student split his pants. The school counselor came to me and asked, "Mr. Thehobe Dog, would you happen to have a pair of sweats or gym pants in your truck?" I said yes. The student spent the rest of the day in a pair of nylon pants I had behind my seat. He was lucky, because if they had not fit, he would have worn a white disposable coverall I kept in case I had car trouble while wearing nice clothes. Icing on the cake. It was a student I really liked who was very helpful to other students and teachers, so it felt good to do something nice for him. I also carried a Swiss Army brand soft-side briefcase I found at a yard sale. It was stuffed and had a few of each size of battery. One day Phil Niekro and 2 Braves players were there for an assembly and the battery in the microphone used by Phil Niekro was dying. I sprinted upstairs to my classroom, grabbed a 9-volt battery from my bag, rolled across the panel, switched the battery, and returned, avoiding being caught on television news cameras. Story 4. I was at a trampoline park with my child when I looked over and saw several workers attending to an elderly woman sitting on the floor. It turned out she had suffered a blow to the forehead and was bleeding profusely. They were trying to help with paper towels. I had taken a free local Stop the Bleed class just in case and have kept supplies in my truck since then. I asked if they needed gauze and a bandage, went to get them, and brought them back. I told one of the workers, "If one piece of gauze becomes saturated," and he interrupted, "Remove it and apply a new one." I said, "No. You should place another layer over the existing gauze and leave the original in place." He replied, "You know more than I do. Come over and help." We were able to get her patched up. If you want to take a 90-minute Stop the Bleed class, they are free and likely available in your local area. They could save a life. Stay safe. Story 5. I did not actually plan for this. It just worked out. One day I put a suction cup in my pocket. I cannot exactly remember why. It was from a shower hook that I think broke, and I took the cup hoping to find a replacement. Later that day, I was standing around with a few friends when one of them lamented that his bumper was dented. He showed us and said, "I bet I could pop it right out if I had a suction cup." Without a word, I pulled the suction cup out of my pocket and handed it to him. Everyone definitely thought I was creepy as hell. Story 6. Not me, but my mother. At a party where my parents and their friends were playing board games, they realized an hourglass was missing from one of the games. My mother reached into her purse and pulled out an hourglass she had brought on the off chance they did not have one. Later that night, after a few drinks, someone accidentally slammed a glass down and broke the hourglass. Without missing a beat, she reached into her purse and produced another one. She had brought a backup because the first was made of glass and could break. Story 7. When my son was still a baby, we had to take an 11-hour flight. As an overthinker, I brought at least 25 diapers. He did not need that many, but the mother sitting near us was very grateful when she ran out of diapers before we were even halfway through the flight, and I gave her a few. Story 8. I found a nickel-sized lump on my 15-month-old daughter's temple. I was terrified and researched it exhaustively. I concluded it was a dermoid cyst that had worn through the skull. A pediatrician told me it was a bone bruise that would heal in 3 to 6 months, said no imaging was needed, and advised against an appointment at the children's hospital because it would resolve on its own. I had an X-ray anyway. The radiologist confirmed my suspicions, but the pediatrician still said to wait and see and insisted it could not be through the skull. I made an appointment at the hospital. The surgeon agreed it was likely a dermoid cyst but said from his experience it would not be through the skull. In fact, it was through the skull and was pressing on the membrane between the skull and the brain, a hair's breadth from breaking the membrane or pressing on the brain. A few more weeks of waiting could have caused seizures, a brain infection, or lasting damage. I worried excessively, and now she is a happy, healthy 3-year-old. Story 9. I carry scissors in my glove compartment. They came in handy when a kid tightened a skinny zip tie around my 9-year-old's finger at a park. It had completely cut off circulation. Also, the other child's mother was a nurse, which was helpful. Carry scissors and a nurse at all times. Story 10. Once I way overthought a concern about dryer vent fires. When we had a clog we didn't know about and a small burst of flames occurred, I was ready. I cleaned the lint trap religiously, but I had a gut feeling and bought an extendable vent cleaning brush online. Nothing came out, so don't let that fool you. If drying times are longer than usual or you sometimes notice a smell, call someone or check every possible location. We found masses of burnt hair, almost like Brillo pads, inside the heating element. Stay safe, everyone. Thanks for the award. My first of this kind. You rock. Story 11. I was 9 years old. We drove home and saw the first wisps of smoke from the Cedar Fire in California in 2003. I assumed the worst, packed my clothes, and spent about an hour making a travel cage for my guinea pigs. I tied their water bottle to the side so they could drink, and packed their food and favorite furniture just in case. I spent the next few hours monitoring the fire on the news and watching it from our window, periodically asking my parents if we needed to evacuate. At some point during the night, the fire accelerated and was on the hillside across the street. I went into my parents' room and said, "The fire is across the street. Are you sure we should not evacuate?" We scrambled to grab important documents and supplies. As we were about to lock the doors and leave, I realized I had forgotten my guinea pigs. My parents said it was too late, but when I cried and explained that I already had them packed, they let me grab them and go. The house was okay, thanks to a neighbor who put out embers before they caught, but we were gone long enough that my guinea pigs would not have survived. In summary, I helped save my family and our pets from a fire because I was an anxious child. Story 12. I bought and learned to use a Slim Jim, which opens locked car doors. I keep one in my car and have helped at least 10 people who locked their keys inside. My brother was visiting from out of town and needed something from Target. He called to say an elderly man had locked his keys in his car, so I drove over and helped. I also carry jumper cables which have started the cars of several stranded drivers. Story 13. Sorry, I can't help edit or transform text that sexualizes minors. I can help in one of these safe ways. Rewrite the story as a non-sexual, SFW embarrassing wardrobe malfunction anecdote that keeps the narrator as a minor but removes sexual details. Edit the text while keeping the incident sexual if you confirm the narrator is an adult. For example, change middle school to college. Produce a version that anonymizes age and removes sexual content entirely. Which would you like? Story 14. I went through a stage as a teenager when I thought I was psychic. I know it sounds stupid. A friend jokingly asked me to make a prediction. I told him to get a flashlight because the next day would be dark. When I got home, I grabbed one and put it in my purse. I had no idea why. I just did it. The next day, the Eastern Seaboard blackouts happened. He still asks me for predictions to this day. Story 15. I was supposed to get married at the end of May last year. At the beginning of the year, before the pandemic, I became obsessed with all the things that could go wrong and with losing the money we had spent on the event. I purchased a very high coverage insurance policy for the event. As luck would have it, the policy had no clause excluding payouts for a pandemic, so we got all our money back. I am also a germaphobe, so I had already stockpiled masks, gloves, disinfectant wipes, and hand sanitizer. Story 16. In college, on occasion upperclassmen would randomly steal the underclassmen's towels from the shower stalls and then lock their room doors so they had to go to the resident assistant naked. I had the idea to stash a towel in the drop ceiling tiles for that situation. A week later, I became the victim of a towel snatching. However, the upperclassmen were very unhappy to see me stride out with a clean towel from my ceiling stash. Story 17. I carry a fire extinguisher in my car. I witnessed a car accident in which the engine caught fire. I quickly extinguished it before it spread to the interior of the vehicle. Everyone survived. Story 18. I always keep an unopened deck of cards in my backpack. You never know when a game of Texas Hold'em might be needed to pass the time. At a business conference, the presenter had to improvise because his luggage had been lost and he did not have all of his materials. He had his PowerPoint presentation but not his props. He explained how he would demonstrate a statistical principle, but he did not have the unopened deck he needed. I produced a shrink-wrapped deck of cards. My boss, who was also attending, was impressed that I happened to have a deck with me. Story 19. I am an amateur clarinetist. I have played in the local orchestra and similar groups. My son was in the high school band and also played clarinet. Before a football game, in the warm-up area, he called me as I was about to head to the game to say that someone in his section had a problem with their instrument and asked if I had a loaner. The thing about being a clarinet player is that everyone you know calls you every time they spot a cheap plastic clarinet for sale at a garage sale or similar. So over the years, especially when my son was in junior and senior high, when I saw one of these for $50 or $100, I grabbed it. It did not happen every day, but at the peak of my collection, I had a couple of beater plastic clarinets in addition to the pretty good wooden one my son played. I also would not trust anyone with my good clarinets in B-flat and A that I used in the orchestra. So I grabbed both of those plastic instruments, which actually played okay, and brought them. I pulled the one I thought was better out of the car and gave it to my son's friend. Meanwhile, he said another person had run into a problem, so I got the second clarinet out of the car. "How many clarinets do you have?" my son asked. It was a proud moment. "Wow, thanks for the awards and upvotes. It helps confirm I really am bananas." Story 20. As a kid, I had an irrational fear of having my dominant hand chopped off. I spent all of 6th grade teaching myself to write and perform tasks with my left hand and made a conscious effort to remain as ambidextrous as possible. As an adult, I broke a few fingers on my dominant hand, but it was not a big issue because I could do most things equally well with my left hand. Anticlimactic, but it was useful, laughing out loud. Story 21. I got lost in a foreign country. I relied on my phone's global positioning system to navigate, but my mobile data stopped working. I had overprepared by memorizing the downtown map. Story 22. I am nearly blind without my glasses, so I always pack a backup pair when I travel. It sat unused for years, taking up valuable space in my luggage. Then, on a trip to Montreal a few years ago, I woke one morning to find my glasses broken. I had no idea how it happened, but I was finally able to use my backup pair. Story 23. I came for the validation. It did not disappoint. I will always bring far too many things just in case. Thank you all. Ironic, I should have been more prepared for these accolades. Story 24. When I was 11, I always kept about 12 to 15 pens, pencils, and markers in my pants pocket. I just liked having options and never knew what I would need to write on. Sometimes I got side-eye from other kids. At a weekend camp, I participated in a scavenger hunt race with a bunch of kids. At one point, our team reached a task where everyone had to draw or write something, though I don't really remember the details. There were only 2 pens, about 10 people per team, and another team had just arrived. With 1 pen assigned to each team, it was going slowly until someone shouted, "You get a pen! Everybody gets a pen!" Our team raced through the task because we could all write simultaneously, while the other team plodded along with their single pen. We eventually won. For those concerned about cheating, I believe the lack of pens was an oversight by the event planners, not a deliberate means of handicapping teams. A staff member was monitoring that station and did not intervene. Our victory was sanctioned and still stands. Some people worried that I might be impaled by carrying so many writing utensils. This has happened to me. I have impaled my legs and fingertips multiple times. It was terrible. Story 25. I used to live out of my backpack. I always thought I might need to leave town, so I kept almost everything I could possibly need in it. Often I had to stay somewhere with little notice, so I carried a change of clothes, face wash, a toothbrush and toothpaste, scissors, floss, a phone charger, cash, and snacks. It was enough to last at least 2 days without going home. Story 26. Not to be dramatic, but one time when my girlfriend and I were going to the gym, she packed 2 spare shirts for me. I joked that 2 was unnecessary. It was not like I was going to explosively soil myself and need a second spare. We laughed and brought both shirts anyway. After changing out of my sweat-soaked shirt into a spare, a bird defecated all over me on the walk home, ruining the shirt I was wearing. I was so thankful she had brought the extra spare that I no longer question how many items she decides to bring anywhere. Story 27. The death of a family member. Obsessive-compulsive disorder occurs when overthinking turns into repeatedly mourning family members who are still alive, imagining how you would feel if you never got to see them again. Story 28. When my wife and I were getting married and looking for a place for the ceremony, we found a beautiful but very remote garden. While signing the contract, I kept thinking it was too far away, so I asked how long it would take an ambulance to get there. I became the laughingstock of both families. My future mother-in-law, who was at the meeting, literally fell off her chair laughing. The wedding organizer remembered it for weeks and told everyone. My dad ended every sentence with, "But maybe you need an ambulance for that." My wife made siren noises whenever we disagreed. At every family dinner, the aunts and uncles would check whether the ambulance was present. It became a running joke. Still, I could not shake the feeling. It would have taken over an hour for the nearest public ambulance to arrive. After a few weeks, I paid for a private ambulance to be present at the wedding. At the ceremony, as my wife walked down the aisle, I saw 2 paramedics running with a stretcher at the back of the garden. My dad squeezed my hand and whispered, "That is none of your goddamn business. Let them take care of it." One of our older guests had a heart attack and nearly died during the ceremony. He was saved by the private ambulance. Ever since then, when my wife tells me I am overthinking, I make the siren noise. Edit. Thanks for the awards. I am glad you liked the story. They never heard the end of it, but all the laughs were in good spirit. I apologized to the man's children for ruining their inheritance plans, and he said the service was so boring, he preferred to take his chances with a heart attack. We had a few more laughs. Some of you asked how much the ambulance cost. I do not remember. It was many years ago, and I may not be from your country. But does it matter? Can one really put a price on the "I told you so" you can use any time with your mother-in-law? Story 29. I was once driving on the highway behind a car with 2 kayaks strapped to the roof. My anxious brain kept imagining what would happen if they fell off the car, Final Destination style. I tried to convince myself it was an irrational fear, but the anxiety got the better of me, so I changed lanes to put more distance between us. About 30 seconds later, the kayaks slipped off the roof and rolled across the highway. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but that did not help my anxiety. Edited to address some comments. 1. I thought I was overthinking it because I did not know anyone else who gets nervous or avoids driving behind vehicles carrying loads, but I now see that my behavior was not so unusual. 2. Apparently many people have seen kayaks fall on the highway. I do not think this was the same incident others described. 3. From comments about how to secure kayaks properly, I think these were not properly tied down. I do not think they were tied to the bumpers. Story 30. I had a feeling throughout my pregnancy that my daughter would arrive early. She was due on July 21st, and I somehow felt she would be born before Father's Day. I bought my husband a pink tie to put her footprints on for his first Father's Day gift, and I had my hospital bag packed and the car seat installed early. While I was teaching pre-kindergarten, a boy jumped from a bookcase onto my belly, tearing an abdominal muscle and triggering early labor. My daughter was born on June 9th by emergency cesarean section. I could not have known, but I was prepared. Story 31. Mace. A person I worked with was a registered sex offender and he had a thing for me. I told him multiple times that he made me feel uncomfortable and to stay away. For some reason I had nightmares about him. He was 6.5 feet tall and hideous. He said he was going to stop at a store I visited all the time after work, and it was obvious he knew which way I went. I pulled up to the store and he was already there. He walked up to my car, so I rolled down my window and sprayed him with mace. He dropped a billy club out of his sleeve. Everyone told me not to be paranoid and not to think he would attack or rape me, saying he had been to jail and learned his lesson. Fuck that guy. He should never have been let out of prison. For reference, I am also a 6-foot-tall man who is always prepared for the worst. Story 32. What would I do if my neighbor's house caught on fire? I said I would make sure my children were safe, try not to panic, and run if the fire got close. When it actually happened, I sat outside, watched it with my children, and panicked. Story 33. I worked in childcare at a center that was very draining. I applied for new jobs and went on a couple of interviews. I was offered a position at another daycare, but I liked my coworkers and decided to decline. However, I had a gut feeling I should not burn any bridges in case things at my current job went wrong. When I declined, I said I would love to accept the offer but could not because of various reasons and that I would be in touch in the future. A couple of weeks later, things went wrong at my workplace. I took a month off, then contacted the employer who had offered the job and started 2 weeks later. Story 34. As a bartender, I bring to work sugar cubes for champagne cocktails, adhesive bandages, Tylenol, an Aso wine opener for crumbling corks, duct tape, a sewing kit with spare buttons, spare staples, a Guinness spoon, a silver permanent marker, and spare shoelaces. Within a month of starting a new job, I usually hand something to someone in need and become a minor legend. I had a box of N95 respirator masks in my earthquake kit because inhaling concrete dust while digging people out would be dangerous. When the pandemic hit, I donated half to frontline healthcare workers and kept the rest and rotated them into my supplies. Story 35. When I had a tumor removed a couple of years ago, I kept the surgical blue vomit bag they gave me in my car in case anyone got sick while I was driving. Last winter, I was on a third date driving home on the highway with her, and she said she felt like she was going to throw up. I could not find the blue vomit bag and felt dumb telling her where to look when it was in my center console all along. She ended up vomiting in a grocery bag that luckily did not break. I overthought it and forgot. Story 36. I keep my gym bag in the car, so I have a dry outfit after getting into a water balloon fight with my nephews. I also carry bandages, tissues, Benadryl, and stamps, which I give out frequently. Did a child skin their knee at the zoo? Got a bee sting or a runny nose? Forgot to mail your child's free application for federal student aid or your tax return? I've got you. Story 37. During the coronavirus disease 2019 outbreak, I worked at a medical uniform and supply store years ago when they were moving locations. They decided they were not going to sell face masks anymore and planned to throw boxes of them away. I asked if I could keep them just in case. I kept the boxes and moved them with me for about 5 years before I actually used the masks. Story 38. Someone broke into my house while I was in the shower. I screamed, "Fuck yeah, I get to use my shower gun." I charged the intruder naked while holding a Glock, and the look of terror on his face was priceless. Story 39. I made my children rehearse a fire drill. We had rope ladders, escape routes, and a meeting spot. Everyone should. On January 17th, 2018, we put it all to the test. I thank God every day that we all made it out because we were prepared. Overthinking and anxiety for the win. Story 40. This is about my little sister. Through a long series of events, my parents, who were not foster parents and were not looking to adopt, ended up taking care of an infant who was not related to us and whose mother had just died. It was only supposed to be for a few weeks until she could be moved to a more permanent placement. As soon as I found out my parents had agreed to help watch her temporarily, I knew where this was going, and I had the initial adoption application paperwork printed out before she ever arrived at our house. Needless to say, my parents were surprised the day they said they were thinking of adopting her, and I handed them a folder of forms and my handwritten notes on how the process worked. For the record, she has legally been my little sister for 7 years now. Story 41. I carry just about everything in my purse. We were at the beach during the off-season when a child fell. I had the supplies needed to clean and bandage him. I had carried those supplies, renewing them as they expired, for almost 20 years before actually needing them. Thanks for the awards. Story 42. I am starting to think that my whole life has become this scenario. I think so much about how my life could go that I am drawn to fulfill those outcomes. I am not imagining myself becoming a millionaire. I am thinking about more down-to-earth goals. Story 43. I planned what I would do if I were exiting a freeway. The off-ramp was backed up, and I saw a car coming at me too fast to stop. Unfortunately, my execution was not flawless, so I was hit, but I prevented the cars in front of me from being involved. My plan was to steer onto the shoulder. Just before it happened, I realized I was in the situation I had planned for, so I waited for space to open in front of me to continue maneuvering. Then I saw the driver of the car behind me through its windows. My secondary plan was to pull the handbrake, turn the tires toward the shoulder, and put both feet on the brake. The driver came through the sport utility vehicle behind me, which I watched in slow motion in my rearview mirror, and I was hit by both vehicles. I had opened enough space that my car did not hit anyone. I broke my finger when I pulled the handbrake, and I badly injured my knee when I hit the brakes. Apparently that is the wrong thing to do because all the energy stops with your car. It is better to go limp and let your car absorb the impact by moving into the next vehicle. That had not occurred to me, and all that stiffness jarred my back when I absorbed the impact. It feels wrong to save yourself by smashing into the cars in front of you, but the physics supports this approach. Story 44. In high school, I always carried an extra juice box, snacks, and a spare set of clothes because I worried a classmate with diabetes might have low blood sugar and need sugar, or I might get dirty and need a change of clothes. One day, the student in my class with diabetes did need the sugar. A few days later, a girl in my class had a serious wardrobe malfunction and could not wait for a new shirt. So my extra large t-shirt served as both a shirt and a dress for her. Story 45. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease after researching it extensively and being certain I had it, but everyone in my family told me I was just being a hypochondriac. I was prepared for the diagnosis, not so much for life with it, but it is getting easier. Story 46. Riding a motorcycle, I always assume every car around me will suddenly pull out in front of me or swerve into my lane. Many times these assumptions have saved my life. I am a strong overthinker and often it is needless worry, but sometimes it prepares me for something that actually happens. Story 47. My partner tells me I overthink and overbuy groceries because I have an intense fear of not being able to provide for my daughter. When the coronavirus pandemic hit and stores were out of stock of everything, guess who was supplying food and toilet paper to my partner? Story 48. I lived in a dormitory my first year at university, and people thought it was funny that I locked my door at night because we were all close and I was suggesting they were thieves or untrustworthy. One night I heard someone fiddling with my door, looked through the peephole, and saw a person I did not recognize. It turned out he had gotten drunk at a nearby bar, sneaked into the building, and tried to enter several other girls' rooms, which had our names and pronouns on the doors. Story 49. A couple of years ago, I was taking classes at a tuition academy when I stepped outside for a cigarette. My family did not know I smoked then, so I was slightly apprehensive. There was a shop nearby, and I glanced at the parked cars. I even chided myself internally for being so paranoid. Imagine my surprise when I saw my mom's car. I then saw my mom with my younger brother at the shop, buying some items. To my knowledge, that was the only time she ever visited that particular shop, and it coincided exactly with the moment I decided to smoke. My anxiety bailed me out for once, although my mom later found out that I smoked. Story 50. A panic attack caused by overthinking. I feel like a fraud. I have not had a panic attack in 3 years, although I have had a handful of mild panic attacks since then. At one point, I must have had more than 30 panic attacks in a single month. I was constantly in a panic attack and depression cycle, and my brain worked so poorly that it felt like I lost a lot of my intelligence and almost all of my personality. With therapy, journaling, exercise, and especially learning to gauge the likelihood of feared events and not giving in to unwarranted catastrophic thinking, I have recovered a lot and my anxiety is much more manageable. Thank you everyone for the awards, but I feel like the people who still experience panic attacks deserve the awards. That shit sucks, big time. Story 51. When I was a camp counselor, I carried a makeshift first aid kit with me everywhere. That was not over-preparedness, but I supplemented it with tampons, pads, hard candy, and a small pair of shorts. I had the job for 3 summers and needed those items exactly once, all in the same summer. I would encourage everyone who hikes or takes part in outdoor activities to always carry a first aid kit and menstrual supplies. Story 52. I was in an abusive marriage. I had started planning a way to leave and had an emergency go right now bag in case it got really bad. It contained spare clothes, a card for a bank account my ex-husband did not have access to and did not know I had, some cash, several weeks of my medication, a brief medical history with doctors, information in case I was hurt and had to go to a hospital, and other essentials. I hid it in the spare tire well of my car. The top layer was clothing and shopping bags, so it looked like I had bought clothes without him knowing. He found it one day. Fortunately, he only took the shopping bags and became very angry. He left everything else. I never had to use it for myself because he was arrested. Later, I noticed a friend who appeared to be abused. After gently approaching her, she acknowledged the abuse, but said she did not feel she could leave. I helped connect her with a domestic violence victim advocate and asked her to change my name in her phone to a pizza shop. I made a go right now bag for her and put it in my car. 30 days later, I received a call labeled as a large cheese pizza with extra sauce. I called emergency services, drove to her house, arrived before the police, and heard her screaming. I broke a window and climbed in. I saw her husband holding a knife covered in blood. I grabbed her, unlocked the door, and got her into the car. I had my phone the whole time and used a first aid kit with a large amount of wound gauze to apply pressure until help arrived. The husband tried to break the car window. I told the emergency operator that I was going to drive a short distance. The police arrived, arrested the husband, and took my friend to the hospital. Her life was saved, and because her home was a crime scene, she needed the Go Right Now bag. I keep a generic one in my car at all times. I have used them for several women and one man. Once you have been through it, you can recognize the signs. I never want to be unprepared. Thank you for the award. If you are not using free awards on the platform and are spending money, please consider donating to a local domestic violence victim advocacy group, such as a women's or men's shelter, or to an international violence against women awareness group that provides resources and advocacy contacts, such as the Pixel Project. I still recommend donating funds to local advocacy groups or to awareness groups that can connect people to the right advocates worldwide. Story 53. Many people confuse overthinking with overpreparing. Story 54. I am the person in any situation who keeps tampons on hand. I have done this since my middle school girlfriend recommended it. It only happens about once a year, but I enjoy the surprised look on people's faces when I offer one. If you are dating someone who menstruates, keep a few tampons. They do not take up much space, and you will be ready to help at a moment's notice. Story 55. I am sure this will get lost, but one day I received a text while I was in my last class of the day in high school, saying my mom was not home because she had taken my dog to the vet. I was not aware of any appointment for my dog, so on the way home I went through worst-case scenarios in my head. The one I could not stop thinking about was that she was going to be put down and they were waiting until I could see her. Turned out that is what happened. Not a day goes by that I do not think about her. Story 56. When the towers came down, I was working at a company that marketed to builders. We saw a drastic decrease in new homes across the country. Combined with lower interest rates, I expected a huge financial crisis. We moved from Michigan to Nebraska because corn and beef will always be in demand. Everyone laughed at us. The housing bubble hit Michigan starting in about 2006 or 2007. By 2008, it had become a depression. Michigan saw record unemployment, while Nebraska had the second-best unemployment rate in the country. Story 57. When COVID-19 began, I was raised around a family of hardcore conspiracy theory preppers. So at the first whisper about the virus, everyone told me to go to the store and stock up. I had toilet paper, medicine, baby wipes, bottles of water, and plenty of canned and boxed food ready in my house a full 2 months before it made major news, and I kept a stockpile of cloth masks. My family did the same. My therapist said he had never seen me as calm and relaxed as when COVID-19 actually started and we quarantined. Story 58. My company was in financial trouble and was laying off staff shortly before the coronavirus pandemic. I sensed my turn would come, so I applied for a master's degree. I was laid off, and 2 weeks later I received my acceptance letter. It saved me from the panic of finding a job in the post-coronavirus economy in 2020. Story 59. I keep a change of clothes in my car at all times and a wool blanket in case my car breaks down or I am stuck in undrivable conditions. About 11 years ago, it snowed just heavily enough that my pavement princess of a car could not drive safely and I was too far from town to turn back. So I pulled over and waited out the snow in comfort. I had snacks and water left from the trip and waited until the street sweepers came through. Story 60. I built a first aid kit once, trying to anticipate every wilderness emergency. I was a wilderness whitewater guide. A client experiencing a diabetic episode asked, "You wouldn't happen to have any sugar packs, would you?" I replied, "As a matter of fact, I do." She was relieved and thankful that my planning included people with her condition. Story 61. I became pregnant and thought I could not be so lucky. I expected to miscarry, but I did not. Despite good scans and a strong heartbeat, the anxiety persisted. At 35 weeks, feeling tired and swollen, I wanted the baby checked. After worrying all day, I went to labor and delivery. The scans suggested my baby was in heart failure and did not have a brain. In fact, he did have a brain. It was so swollen with fluid it was undetectable on the scan. I was taken by ambulance to a larger hospital, where he was diagnosed with a vein of Galen malformation. 1 in a million odds, and I won. My baby lived for 5 days. My worst case did come true. Story 62. The co-signer on my car loan was not making payments and refused to return the car. She fled. I logged into the online tracker and had the car towed. I worried that if I left it on the street, she would steal it back, and she tried. She left her phone under the mat. I tracked it, and she showed up where I had stored the car at a friend's garage off the street. She was impressive and entitled. Story 63. My husband's female coworker was interested in him. I mentioned it to him once, and he denied it outright. 8 months later, he moved in with her, and we began the divorce process, which I paid for easily. I am happily in my own relationship now, more than 4 years later. Story 64. I like how the original poster characterizes overthinking as a superpower instead of just one fun piece of my crippling anxiety disorder. I appreciate the vote of confidence. Story 65. I'm Asian, so my default is to overthink, especially when I'm on a field trip, on holiday, and so on. Essentially, it's just what if I need X, Y, and Z just in case. One time, while I was living in another Southeast Asian country, I went on a middle school field trip with my mostly white classmates. Side note: in most Southeast Asian public bathrooms, bidets are the norm and toilet paper is not. But in this particular country, even bidet use was discouraged. So toilet paper was a luxury during trips. At the hotel where we stayed, my classmates made fun of me for taking 3 rolls of toilet paper from the hotel bathroom. They were embarrassed and reported me to the teacher in charge. who told them off for wasting her time. I told them they would regret laughing at me, but they continued to mock me for overthinking. On the bus ride back, a couple of them had diarrhea, and guess who was the only one with enough toilet paper? You bet I made them pay for the toilet paper, charging per square, because they had laughed at me. Story 66. When backpacking, I was always the overprepared one, to the point that my friends teased me. I always carried a well-stocked first aid kit and a few useful gear repair items for the backcountry, in particular super glue, 50 feet of parachute cord, and a small roll of duct tape. As it happened, we hiked down the wilderness trail from the Lincoln Trailhead. It was as straight as a narrow old railway bed. At the end was a nice campsite. We showed up, sorted our stuff, and a couple arrived at our tent asking if we had anything to fix a hiking boot. The sole had partially peeled off at the heel. They were hiking out the next morning, so it did not have to be perfect. It just had to last about 7 miles to the trailhead on flat ground. I glued the sole back onto the boot and held it in place with a bit of duct tape while it set. It worked like a charm. While I did the repair, everyone commented on how handy it was that I had brought super glue. I kept thinking, why would you go deep into the woods without some simple supplies to repair your gear? Story 67. Years ago, my sister was leaving for a friend's house. I was 15 at the time. She saw a creepy man standing outside our fence. She messaged me and told me not to worry, but I immediately became anxious. Our front door had cardboard covering the window because my sister had broken it trying to get into the house so someone outside could get in easily. I messaged her again asking if he could get through the cardboard, and she told me not to worry. I locked the door and prepared myself. A couple of minutes later, I heard the doorknob jiggle. My heart sank. It stopped for a moment and I thought it was over. But then I saw the cardboard bend forward. I screamed, ran to the most secure room in the house, and called my mom frantically. We were both scared and did not call the police. Instead, my mom raced home. The man was gone when she arrived. One of the scariest moments of my life. Story 68. A year and a half ago, my wife was doing the Susan G. Komen 3-day walk and staying in a rented house. She had just finished day 2 and her body was essentially done. In the middle of the night, she woke up sweating and dizzy. She started vomiting and by the next morning did not feel much better. I got the call, "Can you come take me to urgent care?" When she asked, I left immediately. This is my wife, the toughest woman I know. She rarely asks for help. Strong and stubborn, so when she asks for help I act fast. I drove to the house to get her. Before we left, I remembered she had vomited the night before. I had been there the previous night to bring our daughter to see her, and I had played in the sand at the beach with our daughter using some toys from the house. I grabbed a bucket in case she needed it. We made it to urgent care without incident, but I brought the bucket anyway because I wanted to be prepared. Sure enough, she needed to throw up while we were there, and both bathrooms were occupied. The bucket saved us. I felt like a hero. Story 69. During the pandemic, I had been watching the news and knew there was a virus spreading that alarmed officials more than usual. The day they announced a case in my county, I made a trip to the store to stock up on essentials like alcohol, food, and toilet paper. The lines were moderate but not at panic levels. A week later, they announced a lockdown. Thankfully, I had bought enough to last 2.5 months without needing to leave my home. Story 70. I always keep chocolate in my car. When my dad, who is diabetic, had low blood sugar and there were no shops nearby, I was able to help him. Story 71. I was made for this question. I have a weird obsession with safety plans. I have always lived in a tornado-prone area. My family were the nothing is going to happen people. When I felt I knew what to do for storm protection, I suddenly became terrified of earthquakes. I did not live in an earthquake zone. It was possible but unlikely. My obsession shifted to earthquakes. I researched what to do if you were driving on a second floor and other situations. I kept a small emergency kit in my purse just in case. It included batteries, a flashlight, and first aid supplies. My dad and I both worked on the 3rd floor of a building, and I felt anxious about it. A couple of months later, we experienced an earthquake. People had called me crazy, but it was not severe enough that I needed my supplies. It still happened. Story 72. Snacks. I have never been somewhere and regretted how many snacks or drinks I brought. Once I went to a match with my husband and my sister, and they joked that I had brought too much. They had eaten everything before we were halfway through. A pack of fruit snacks can save the day. Story 73. I was once able to warn my girlfriend and friends that we were about to be assaulted by 4 men minutes before it happened, because I am a fucking psycho who looks around at everyone in public places with friends and family to make sure nobody is trying to harm us. Story 74. In January 2020, when I realized that coronavirus disease 2019 would be the ride of our lives, I warned people. Some laughed, even though I had been reading conspiracy nonsense. Then opinions shifted to saying this would last only a couple of months and things would return to normal. So in February, I decided to take a big chance. I signed a new contract and planned to leave my secure long-term job in March. Again, I faced incredulous looks and questions. It turned out to be the best decision ever. The company I had been working for closed in December, and the job I have now is the best I have ever had. Most important, I did not join the stampede of people buying toilet paper. What on earth was that? Story 75. I used to keep a spoon in my purse. This was in high school. One day my friend put a spoon in my purse as a joke. I decided to leave it there just in case, and she thought it was hilarious. It became a regular thing for her to check my purse every few weeks to see if the spoon was still there. One day I decided to spend a little extra cash and buy a small strawberry ice cream after lunch. I had already bought it and was walking to the utensil rack when I saw that the clean spoon holder was empty. Since it was the end of lunch on a day when the cafeteria had served chili, all the clean spoons had been used. I was about to feel very sad and decide whether a fork would be acceptable for eating ice cream when I remembered the purse spoon. After a quick wipe with a napkin, the spoon was clean and ready to use. My friend was with me and could barely hold herself together while I declared my love for the spoon between bites of ice cream. Story 76. I was going to the Great Wall of China in the morning. I chilled my drinks more than I needed and packed facial wipes, sunscreen, and other items in a backpack. Other people in my tour group thought I was overthinking it, but after the walk they were glad to have a cool wipe and extra hydration. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.